I kept the strengths from your outline public humiliation as the ignition point. The financial fraud engine, the woman whose weapon is her mind, rather than a makeover. And fixed the main weaknesses I gave Maggie agency from the very first scene, instead of having her stand passive, made Ethan's entrance land on a single devastating line, and seeded the debt conspiracy early, so the later collapse feels earned rather than convenient. Here is the opening. The church doors slammed open hard enough to rattle the window panes, and every laughing mouth in Clover Falls went silent at once. Ethan Cole Walker walked straight down the center aisle past 200 people who'd dressed in their Sunday best to watch a fat woman get humiliated at her own wedding. He stopped beside Maggie Dawson, took her cold, trembling hand in his, and turned to face the whole grinning town that had mocked her for 30 years. "The only shame in this building," he said, his voice carrying to the back pews, "is how every last one of you has treated her." Nobody laughed after that. If a story like this matters to you, do me a small kindness and subscribe to the channel, then stay with me all the way to the end, because this one earns its ending. And tell me in the comments which town or city you're listening from right now, so I can see just how far Maggie's story has traveled. Now let's begin. The whispering had started the moment Maggie Dawson stepped into the church, and it hadn't stopped since. Lord have mercy, would you look at her squeeze through that door? Heard Crow had to throw in extra money just to get a man to take her. Ain't a man alive desperate enough. You watch. Ethan Walker won't show. Not for that. Maggie heard every word. She always heard them. She stood at the front of the church with her spine straight and her chin level. Her hands folded over the worn fabric of the only good dress she owned, and she did not give them the tears they'd come for. Behind her in the third pew, the Hartley sisters didn't even bother to lower their voices. Bless her heart, she actually thinks somebody's coming. She put flowers in her hair, Ruth. Flowers. Maggie's jaw tightened, but she kept her eyes on the empty altar. It was old Pastor Hewitt who finally cleared his throat and leaned toward her kindly the way a man speaks to a dog he expects to bolt. "Miss Dawson," he murmured, "if the groom don't arrive within the half hour, we'll dismiss everybody quiet-like. No need to drag it out." "He'll come," Maggie said. "Now I only mean to spare you." "He'll come, Pastor." Mr. Crow made certain of it. That was the part nobody in the pews understood, and Maggie understood it better than any of them. This wasn't a wedding. It was a collection notice with a preacher attached. At the back of the church near the door, Silas Crow sat with his gloved hands resting on the silver head of his cane and a small patient smile on his face. He owned the bank's paper on half the ranches in the county. He owned the lien on Ethan Walker's land. And he owned in every way that the law allowed, and several that it didn't, the spectacle about to unfold. "Miss Dawson looks well," Crow said to the man beside him, loud enough to be polite, soft enough to be cruel. Considering what Mr. Crow... Considering she's marrying a man who can't give her children. Crow's smile didn't move. Two broken things make one whole problem, I always say. Fitting they found each other. The man laughed. So did the woman in front of him. The laughter spread down the pew like spilled water, and Maggie felt it run up the back of her neck, and still she did not turn around. It was 11 minutes past the hour when the side door opened. Not the grand front doors where everyone was watching. The plain side door near the pulpit, the one the choir used. It swung open, and Ethan Cole Walker stepped through in a clean shirt and the same trail-worn boots he'd worn every day of his life, and the whole church turned at once like a field of wheat in the wind. He didn't look at them. He looked at her. "Miss Dawson," he said, and tipped his hat. "Apologies I'm late. Had a calf turned the wrong way in the chute. Couldn't leave the animal to suffer." "You came," Maggie said. It wasn't a question, but it came out like one anyway. Said I would. A letter from Silas Crow isn't a promise. It's a threat with good handwriting. Something flickered across Ethan's face. Surprise, maybe. He hadn't expected her to say it out loud. Not here. Not now. "Reckon that's true," he said quietly. "Then we understand each other." From the back of the church, Crow's voice rolled forward smooth as oil. "Walker, so good of you to honor your obligations. I confess I had my doubts. Ethan turned finally and looked at the man who held his life in a leather ledger. Did you now? A man in your position, Crow said, rising, leaning lightly on his cane. Can't afford to be choosy. And a woman in hers. He gestured toward Maggie with 2 fingers the way a man points at livestock. Well, let's call it a charitable arrangement. 2 people nobody else would have brought together by the kindness of a friend. The Hartley sisters tittered. A few of the men chuckled into their fists. Somebody near the window said just loud enough, "Charity wedding." And the word rippled through the church and broke into open laughter. Maggie felt her ears go hot. She kept her chin level. She had survived worse than laughter. She had survived the years her mother spent apologizing for her to strangers. She had survived being 12 years old and hearing her own aunt say it would have been a mercy if she'd been born plain instead of plain and fat. She had survived all of it by refusing, absolutely refusing to let any of them see her bleed. But Ethan Walker did not laugh. Ethan Walker walked. He came up the aisle, slow and steady, boots loud on the floorboards in the sudden hush, and he didn't stop until he was standing right beside her, close enough that his shoulder nearly touched hers. His body turned out toward the crowd like a fence between her and all of them. "That's far enough," Ethan said. The laughter stuttered and died. "I want to say something before the pastor does his part." He went on, and his voice wasn't loud, but it filled the room because the room had gone so quiet you could hear the candles. "I've lived in this county my whole life, knew most of your fathers, buried some of them. And I'd have told you up until about a minute ago that Clover Falls was full of decent folks." "Ethan," started a man in the front, an old friend embarrassed. "Let me finish, Tom." Ethan's eyes moved across the pews, slow taking each face in turn. "You all came here today, put on your good clothes, brought your wives, your children, and you came to watch a woman get shamed. That's the truth of it. Don't dress it up. You came for a show." He paused and let the silence sit. "Well, here's your show." He turned to Maggie, took her hand, and said loud and clear, "The only shame in this building is how every one of you has treated her." You could have heard a pin drop on cotton. Maggie stared at him. Her composure, which had held against 30 years of cruelty, very nearly cracked against this one act of kindness. She blinked hard once and forced it down. "You don't have to do that," she said under her breath. "Do what?" "Defend me. I didn't ask you to." "I know you didn't. I've handled them my whole life. I don't need a man to—" "I ain't doing it for you, ma'am," Ethan said quietly, and there was something raw and tired underneath the words. "I'm doing it because I'm sick to death of standing in rooms full of people too cowardly to say the cruel thing to a person's face. I've been on the other end of it. The whispers, the looks, broken Walker. The Walker boy that can't." His jaw worked. "I figured if I'm going to be the joke of this town, I'd at least pick the company I keep while I'm laughed at." For a long moment, Maggie didn't say anything. Then, very softly, "That's the first true thing anyone said to me in this church." In the back, Silas Crow was no longer smiling. "How touching," Crow said, and his voice had lost some of its silk. He came forward a few steps, cane tapping. "Pastor, perhaps we ought to proceed before Mr. Walker turns this into a revival meeting. There's a contract to honor. Or had you forgotten, Ethan? The terms." And there it was, the leash given a tug in front of everyone. Ethan's shoulders went rigid. Maggie watched it happen, watched the steel go out of him, just slightly, watched the debt land on his back again, like a saddle. "I hadn't forgotten," Ethan said. "No, I didn't imagine you had." Crow smiled again, thin. "Proceed, Pastor." Pastor Hewitt fumbled with his book. Yes, of course. Dearly beloved." Wait. Every head turned. It was Maggie who'd spoken. She wasn't looking at the pastor. She was looking past him at Crow, and there was something in her face that hadn't been there a moment before. Not fear, not shame. Something cool and exact, like a woman doing arithmetic. "Mr. Crow," she said, "before the pastor goes on, I have a question about the contract." The church murmured. This wasn't in the script. The fat woman was supposed to relief. She was not supposed to ask questions. "The contract is between myself and Mr. Walker," Crow said. "I hardly think it concerns the bride." "It concerns the bride a great deal," Maggie said, "seeing as I'm about to put my name beside his on every debt he owes you. That's how marriage works in this territory, isn't it, Mr. Crow? His liabilities become mine. The moment that ring goes on, I'm a party to whatever he signed." The room had gone very still. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. Crow's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "You've a remarkable head for law, Miss Dawson. For a fat woman." Maggie said it for him, calm as church milk, and the crude word landed in the silence and just sat there ugly and exposed with nobody laughing now. "Go on and finish the sentence, Mr. Crow. You were so eager to start it." A man near the window coughed. Somebody's chair creaked. "I only mean," Crow said, recovering, "that a bride is generally too occupied with happier thoughts on her wedding day to trouble herself with ledgers. I'm not a general bride." Maggie turned to Ethan. "Mr. Walker, have you read the contract you signed with this man? Every line." Ethan hesitated. "I read what he put in front of me." "That's not the same thing." "No," he admitted. "Reckon it ain't. Then before I sign my life to yours, I'd like to read it. All of it. The original loan, the terms, every amendment he's made since." She faced Crow again. "You did say this was a charitable arrangement, Mr. Crow. I'm sure a charitable man has nothing to hide in his paperwork." For the first time, Silas Crow looked at Margaret Dawson and did not see a joke. He saw a problem. "The documents are at my office," he said. "They are not appropriate reading for a wedding. Then we'll postpone the wedding." "Out of the question." The terms, Maggie said, specify a marriage. They don't specify today. I read the public notice you posted at the land office, Mr. Crow. It says a union is to be performed before the 1st of the month. That gives us 9 days. She tilted her head. "Unless there's some reason it must be today. Some reason you'd rather a foolish, grateful bride sign before she's had a chance to read what she's signing." The church was no longer a place of laughter. It had become a place of held breath. 200 people watched the most powerful man in the county get backed into a corner by the very woman he'd dressed up to humiliate. "You misunderstand my kindness for weakness," Crow said, and the silk was gone entirely now. "That's a mistake, Miss Dawson. People who make it tend to regret it." "Is that a threat, Mr. Crow?" Ethan stepped forward, and his hand came to rest light but certain at the small of Maggie's back, a protective thing, an anchoring thing. "Because I'd think real careful before threatening a woman in a house of God in front of the whole town." Crow looked at the hand, looked at the two of them standing shoulder to shoulder. Now the broken rancher and the unwanted bride no longer two separate jokes, but something that had quietly fused into a single hard thing he hadn't accounted for. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Of course it's no threat," he said smoothly. "We're all friends here. By all means, Miss Dawson. Come to my office, Monday morning. Read whatever you like, and then we'll have this little wedding and everyone can go back to their lives." He gathered his cane. "I find I've lost my taste for the ceremony today. Pastor, my apologies. It seems the bride wants a delay." He turned to the pews and spread his hands magnanimous, performing for the crowd. "What can a charitable man do but oblige?" He walked out the side door, and the heavy quiet broke into 100 urgent whispers behind him. But these whispers were different. Maggie could hear it, the change in them. "Did you see his face?" She read the public notice. Who reads the public notice? Postponed it. She postponed Silas Crow. In the front pew, the man named Tom rose slowly, hat in hand, and crossed to where Ethan and Maggie still stood. He was an older man, sun-cracked, the kind who'd worked land his whole life and watched the bank take pieces of it year by year. "Miss Dawson," he said, and he did something none of them had done all morning. He nodded to her, respectful. "Tom Avery. I run the spread out past the creek." He turned his hat in his hands. I read that contract too. Mine, I mean. When Crow lent me against my back 40. He swallowed. Couple years back. Figures never did sit right with me. Interest climbing when I'd swear we agreed it'd hold steady. I never could make sense of it." He looked at her, and there was something almost like hope in his weathered face. "You really gonna read his books?" "Every page," Maggie said. Then, Tom glanced back at his wife, who gave him a small nod. "Then maybe you'd take a look at mine too. When you're done, if it ain't too much trouble." "Mr. Avery," Maggie said, and for the first time that whole long cruel morning, something in her chest loosened. It would be no trouble at all. Ethan watched her. Watched the way the man had nodded to her, the way the whispers had turned, the way the room that had come to laugh was now slowly looking at his bride like she might be something other than what they'd been told. "You all right?" he asked her low when Avery had stepped away. "I'm fine." "You don't have to be fine." Was a hard morning. Maggie looked up at him. He was a head taller, weathered, kind-eyed a man. The whole town called broken, because of a thing that wasn't his fault and was nobody's business. And he'd walked into a church full of people laughing at her and chosen in front of every one of them to stand on her side. "Why did you really come today?" she asked. The truth this time, not the calf. Ethan was quiet a moment. "Because Crow's letter said if I didn't, he'd call my loans by Friday. I'd lose the ranch. My father's ranch. His father's before that." He looked at his boots. "So I came to save my land. That's the ugly truth of it, ma'am. I came because I was cornered same as you." "I appreciate the honesty." But somewhere between the door and the altar, he went on slower now, like he was figuring it out as he said it. "I looked at all of them laughing, and then I looked at you standing there not giving them 1 inch, and I thought—" He stopped, started again. "I thought that is the bravest thing I have ever seen a person do. Just stand there and not break." He met her eyes. "I didn't stay for the land after that. I stayed for that." Maggie Dawson, who had not cried in 9 years, who had taught herself not to cry, the way other people taught themselves to ride or shoot or pray, felt her eyes sting and did not look away from him. "Monday," she said, when she could trust her voice. "We read his books Monday." "Monday," Ethan agreed. "And Mr. Walker." She gathered the worn fabric of her good dress, the dress they'd all mocked, and she stood up just that much straighter. "Whatever your Silas Crow has been hiding in those ledgers, and a man does not flinch like that over honest paper, I am going to find every last bit of it." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled slow, the first real smile to cross his face in longer than he could remember. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I do believe you will." Monday came gray and cold, and Maggie Dawson was standing outside the land office before Silas Crow had even unlocked the door. "You're early," Crow said, key in hand, not bothering to hide his irritation. "You said morning. It's morning." "So it is." He turned the lock. "I'll warn you now, Miss Dawson, these books make for dull reading. Columns of figures. Nothing that'll interest a woman." "Then you've nothing to fear from a woman reading them." His jaw tightened. He held the door, and she went past him, and Ethan came in behind her with his hat in his hands, and his eyes already searching the office like a man counting the exits. Crow led them to a back table and dropped a single leather ledger onto it. "There, the Walker account. Loan principal payments received current balance, all in order." Maggie didn't sit. She looked at the one book. Then she looked at the shelf behind Crow's desk, where a dozen identical ledgers stood in a row. "I asked for the original loan agreement," she said. "The signed terms, every amendment. This is a summary. I want the source. This is what I keep." "No, it isn't." She nodded at the shelf. "You keep those. And the originals stay in the strongbox, I'd imagine, because a man as careful as you doesn't leave signed contracts lying loose." She held his eyes. "Mr. Walker has a right to a copy of anything he signed. That's territorial law, Mr. Crow. Shall I send for the marshal to confirm it, or will you fetch the box?" For a moment, nobody moved. Then Crow smiled the way a man smiles when he's decided to give a child enough rope. "By all means," he said, "read it all. You'll find nothing but a man's poor luck and worse judgment." He crossed to the strongbox, unlocked it, and dropped a thick bundle of papers in front of her. "There. The whole sorry history of Ethan Walker's finances. Enjoy." He sat back in his chair, lit a cigar, and watched her with the lazy patience of a cat at a mousehole. Maggie sat. She licked her thumb, and she began to read. Ethan stood behind her, useless, turning his hat. "What am I looking for?" he murmured. "I don't know yet," she said without looking up. "But a man doesn't guard dull paper this hard." She read for an hour. Crow's cigar burned down to a stub. Twice he checked his pocket watch and sighed loudly, performing his boredom. Maggie ignored him. Her finger moved down column after column, and her face gave away nothing, and the only sound was the turning of pages. Then her finger stopped. It stopped, and it stayed. "Mr. Walker," she said quietly, "when did you take this loan?" "Spring of '78, after the bad winter killed half the herd." "And what rate did Mr. Crow agree to?" 8%. He said 8. "I remember 'cause my father never paid over 6 and I thought it steep." "You're certain?" "I'd swear it on the book." Maggie turned the bundle around so it faced Crow. She set her finger on a line. "Then perhaps Mr. Crow can explain why the original agreement here reads 8% in the body of the contract, but the interest applied to Mr. Walker's balance beginning the second year is calculated at 14. Crow didn't move. "Compounding, standard practice. Compounding doesn't change a rate, Mr. Crow. It changes a total. 8% compounded is still 8%. She turned another page. "But this isn't compounding. This is a different number written in a different hand in the margin after the signatures. Initialed by no one." She looked up. "You altered the rate after he signed." The cigar had stopped halfway to Crow's mouth. "That's a serious accusation," he said softly. "It's not an accusation, it's arithmetic." She turned the bundle back and kept reading faster now, pages flying. "And it's not the only one. Look here, a payment. Mr. Walker, did you make a payment in the fall of $79.40? "I did. Drove a steer to Market Special to make it. Carried the cash here myself." "It's not recorded." Maggie's voice was flat and terrible. "There's no entry for it. $40 vanished. Which means Mr. Crow charged you interest the next year on money you had already paid him." Ethan's hat went still in his hands. "Say that again." "He took your $40, Maggie said, "didn't write it down, and then charged you for owing it." She turned to Crow, and her voice didn't rise, didn't shake, just cut. "How many times, Mr. Crow? How many payments went into your pocket and never onto the page?" Crow set down his cigar very carefully. "You should be careful, Miss Dawson. A clever woman who can't prove her cleverness is just a slanderer. And I have lawyers. So do territorial courts." She held up the page. "This is proof. This handwriting, this number, this missing entry. You can explain it to me, or you can explain it to a judge. Get out of my office." "Gladly." But she didn't move toward the door. She moved toward the shelf. She set her hand on the spine of the next ledger in the row. "But first, I'd like to know whether you did the same to the Averys, and the Hartleys, and every other family whose name is on one of these books. Don't touch those." "Why not?" Her hand didn't move. "If they're honest, what does it matter who reads them?" "Those are private accounts. You've no right." "And there it is." Maggie pulled her hand back slow, and the small smile on her face was the most dangerous thing in the room. "You let me read Mr. Walker's because you thought a woman couldn't read it. You did not expect me to find anything because no one has ever bothered to look. But the moment I reach for the others, you go pale." She picked up the Walker bundle and held it to her chest. "This isn't one man's bad luck, Mr. Crow. This is what you do. To all of them." For one long beat, the mask came off entirely. The charm, the silk, the patient cruelty, all of it dropped away, and what was left underneath looked at Margaret Dawson with naked, calculating hate. "You're keeping those papers," Crow said over my objection. "I'm keeping a copy of my own husband's contract, as is his lawful right." She turned to Ethan. "Aren't I Mr. Walker?" "You surely are, ma'am." Ethan had moved to the door and put his back to it casual, but his eyes never left Crow. "And we'll be taking it with us now." Crow rose. He gripped his cane. For a moment, Maggie thought he might actually try to stop them, this old wolf in his fine coat. And Ethan thought so too, because his shoulders squared. But Crow only smiled, and the smile was worse than rage. "You think you've won something," he said. "You've won a piece of paper and a great deal of trouble. Do you know what I am in this county, Miss Dawson? I am the bank. I am the man who decides which families eat through the winter and which don't. The marshal owes me. The judge owes me. The men who'd be your witnesses owe me their land." He stepped closer, and his voice dropped low. "You can wave your little page in the square if you like, and every soul in Clover Falls will look at it and then look at me and decide they'd rather keep their farms than back a fat spinster and a barren man. He let that land. You've nothing. You have a clever wife, Walker. Pity she's so easily ruined." The room went silent, and Maggie laughed. It was not a big laugh. It was quiet, almost gentle, and it took the wind clean out of Crow's threat. "You think the trouble is mine to fear?" she said. "You poor, frightened man. You've spent so long being the wolf you've forgotten what it feels like to be the one who's been bitten." She walked to the door where Ethan stood. "Every family you've cheated has been ashamed to admit they were fooled. That's how you've stayed safe. Not because they don't know, because they're embarrassed." She opened the door. "I have been laughed at my entire life, Mr. Crow. There is nothing you can shame me with. I don't have the luxury of pride. That's what makes me the one person in this county who isn't afraid of you." She stepped out into the cold, and Ethan followed, and the door swung shut on Silas Crow standing alone among his ledgers. They walked 20 paces before Ethan spoke low and rough. "Maggie, you just made the most dangerous man in Wyoming your enemy in the space of one morning." "I know. He'll come for the ranch. He'll call the loan like the letter said. He could do it by Friday. I know that too." She kept walking, the bundle clutched tight. "Which is why we won't be alone by Friday." "What does that mean?" She stopped at the corner. Across the street, Tom Avery was loading feed sacks onto a wagon, and he saw them, and he straightened, and the question on his face was plain, even at that distance. "Did you read it? Did you find it?" Maggie lifted the bundle of papers so he could see it, and she nodded. Tom Avery dropped the feed sack where he stood. He didn't pick it up. He came across the street, fast hat already in his hand, and his voice cracked when he reached them. "You found something, didn't you? I can see it on your face." "He altered Mr. Walker's interest rate after the signing," Maggie said, "and he hid a payment, took the money, and never recorded it." Tom went white, then red. "That son of a—" He caught himself, glanced around the street, dropped his voice. "He did the same to me. I knew it. I told my wife for 2 years something was wrong with my numbers, and she said I was bad at sums, and maybe I am, but I ain't that bad." The words were tumbling now. "What do we do? What do you need?" "You tell me, and it's done." "I need to see your contract," Maggie said. "The original. And anyone else's you can get me quietly. Widows, old men. Anyone who signed Crow's paper and felt the floor move under them and couldn't say why. There's a dozen at least. More." Tom's eyes were wet and bright. "The Hendersons lost their place to him last spring. Old Widow Pratt's barely hanging on. And there's—" He stopped, lowered his voice further. "There's a fellow used to work for Crow, surveyor. Marked the boundary lines for the foreclosures. He left town sudden year back. Folks said he had a falling out with Crow. If anybody knows where the bodies are buried, in a manner of speaking, it'd be him." Ethan and Maggie exchanged a look. "Where'd he go?" Maggie asked. "Don't rightly know. North, somebody said. But his sister still lives here, runs the dress shop." Tom wiped his face with the back of his hand, embarrassed. "I'll find out. I'll find out today. Mr. Avery?" Maggie put a hand on his arm. "Tell no one why you're asking. Not yet. If Crow learns we're gathering names before we're ready, he'll call every loan in the county and crush all of you in a single week. We move quietly. We move careful. And we do not move at all until we can move all at once." Tom nodded fast like a man given a rope after years of drowning. "All at once," he repeated. "Yes, ma'am. Lord, it's good to hear somebody say we." His voice broke on the word. Been a long time since anybody in this town said we to me. He hurried off toward the dress shop, and Maggie watched him go, and Ethan watched Maggie. You realize what just happened, he said quietly. He's going to find us a witness. No. Ethan shook his head slow, a kind of wonder in it. Not that. I mean... He searched for the words. 3 days ago, that man wouldn't have crossed the street to spit on me. Whole town thought I was a curse, and you were a punchline. And just now, he stood in the middle of Main Street with tears in his eyes and called us we. He looked at her. You did that, with one piece of paper and the nerve to read it. Maggie didn't answer right away. She was staring at the bundle in her hands, and her composure, the iron composure that had held through the church and through Crow's office, finally wavered, just slightly, just at the edges. My whole life, she said. People looked at me and decided what I was before I opened my mouth. Too big, too plain, too much, not enough. Her voice was very steady, which was how Ethan knew it cost her. And the worst part wasn't the cruelty. It was being useless to it. Standing there while they decided and having nothing to fight back with but silence. She lifted the papers. I'm not useless to this. For the first time in my life, the thing they hated me for, that I notice everything, that I never stop thinking, that I'm too sharp for a woman, it's the thing that's going to burn his whole empire down. Ethan was quiet a long moment. Maggie, he said, we never did finish that wedding. She blinked. The change of direction caught her. No, we didn't. After this is over, however it goes. He turned his hat in his hand, suddenly the awkward one. I'd like to finish it. Not 'cause Crow's letter says to. Not 'cause a contract makes us. Just... He met her eyes, and the broken Walker boy that the whole town pitied stood up straight. Because somewhere between that side door and now I stopped counting you as the price of keeping my land. And started counting the land as the least interesting thing I'd get out of the bargain. For the second time in 3 days, Margaret Dawson came very close to crying in public, and for the second time, she beat it back. Ask me again when his empire's ashes, she said. I'll give you a proper answer then. That a yes. That's a focus, Mr. Walker. But the corner of her mouth lifted just barely, and Ethan saw it, and it was enough. They had taken 3 steps toward home when a boy came running up the street, a folded note in his fist shouting Ethan's name. He skidded to a stop, breathless, and held it out. From Mr. Crow, sir. Said to give it to you direct. Said it couldn't wait. Ethan unfolded it, read it once. His face changed. What? Maggie said. What does it say? He turned it so she could see. 2 lines in that careful, beautiful, threatening hand they both knew so well. Your loan is called in full. Payment due in 7 days, or the Walker Ranch is forfeit. Enjoy your clever papers, Mrs. Walker. Maggie stared at the note. Then she did something Ethan did not expect. She smiled. 7 days? She said softly, almost to herself, and tucked the bundle tighter under her arm. He just gave us a deadline. And a deadline, Mr. Walker, is a thing you can plan around. She looked up at him, and her eyes were burning. He thinks he's starting a fire. He doesn't know he just lit the fuse on his own. 7 days was not much time to dismantle an empire, and Maggie spent the first of them at a dress shop talking to a woman who didn't want to talk. I don't know where my brother is, Cora Mills said, folding the same bolt of cloth over and over, not looking up. And if I did, I wouldn't say. He left for a reason. What reason? Maggie asked. His own. Mrs. Mills. Maggie set the Walker bundle on the counter gently, like laying down a card. Your brother surveyed the boundary lines for Silas Crow, marked which land was forfeit and which wasn't. And then a year ago he left town in the middle of the night and hasn't written since. She paused. I think he saw something he wasn't supposed to see, and I think he's been afraid every day since that Crow would come looking. The folding stopped. You think I don't know my own brother's afraid? Cora's voice was thin. I get 1 letter a season, no return address. He won't even tell his own sister where he sleeps. Her hands trembled on the cloth. What did that man do to make a grown fella that scared him? That's what I'm trying to find out. Maggie leaned in. Crow has been moving boundary lines, foreclosing on land that wasn't even owed to him by redrawing the survey so honest acres fell inside the debt. Your brother drew those lines, which means your brother knows they were false. She held the woman's eyes. He didn't run because he did something wrong, Mrs. Mills. He ran because he refused to keep doing it. And a man like Crow doesn't forgive being refused. Cora Mills set down the cloth. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she reached under the counter, pulled out a tin box, and took from it a single creased envelope. This came 2 weeks ago, she said. There's no address on it, but the boy who delivers the mail, he comes down from the relay station at Bitter Creek, north, half a day's ride. She held the envelope to her chest. If you find him, if you bring him into this. Her voice broke. You keep him alive, you hear me? Whatever you're building, you do not let my brother hang for Crow's sins. I give you my word, Maggie said. She walked out with a direction, and that was the first miracle of the 7 days. The second came that evening when Tom Avery arrived at the Walker Ranch with 3 families crowded into a single wagon, and the look of men who'd talked themselves into something they were afraid to do. Brought you the Hendersons, Tom said, climbing down, and the Pratts, and Widow Calloway, who lost her husband's homestead 2 winters back and never did understand how. He lowered his voice. I told them what you found. Took some convincing. They're scared, Maggie. Crow holds paper on every one. Maggie met them in the yard. She didn't make a speech. She just laid the Walker bundle on the tailgate of the wagon, opened it to the altered page, and set her finger on the number written in the margin in Crow's hand. This is what he did to my husband, she said. Changed the rate after the signing, hid a payment, charged interest on money already paid. She looked up at the frightened faces. I'd like to look at your contracts and find out whether he did the same to you. You don't have to let me, but I think you already know the answer, or you wouldn't have come. For a moment, no one moved. Then Widow Calloway, a small woman with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had buried 2 husbands, stepped forward and put a folded contract into Maggie's hands. My Henry signed that the year before he passed, she said. I never could pay it down. The more I paid, the more I owed. I thought I was just a foolish old woman who couldn't do figures. Her chin came up. Tell me I'm not foolish, Mrs. Walker. Tell me he stole from me. Maggie read it by lamplight while they all watched. It took her 4 minutes. You're not foolish, she said quietly. He doubled your rate the year your husband died, when you were too grieved to check. She lowered the paper. He waited until you were broken, and then he robbed you. Widow Calloway made a small sound, and then she was crying, and then she was furious, and the 2 things were the same thing, and the other families crowded in to see, and the yard filled with the low, angry murmur of people discovering all at once that they had not been stupid, they had been swindled. Same as mine. Henderson breathed over the Pratt contract. Look, same hand, same trick. He did it to all of us, Tom said, the whole time, while we tipped our hats to him in the street. He turned to Maggie and his voice shook. What do? We collect every contract he ever wrote, Maggie said. Quietly. We compare the rates in the bodies against the rates he applied. Every alteration in his hand is evidence. Every missing payment is a crime. And then, she paused. We find his surveyor, and we get him to swear that the boundary lines were false. Because cheating on interest is theft. But moving the lines to steal whole homesteads, that's the kind of fraud a territorial judge can't look away from no matter who owes Crow a favor. And how do we get to a judge that ain't in his pocket? Henderson asked. That was the question Maggie had been turning over for 2 days, and she had an answer that frightened her. The Frontier Fair, she said. 6 days from now, the whole county comes, and Crow, she looked at Ethan. Crow has already announced he'll declare the foreclosure on this ranch there, in public, in front of everyone. He wants the whole county to watch him crush us. Why in God's name would we want it public? Widow Calloway said. Because a private foreclosure is a man's word against a woman's. But a public foreclosure with the territorial circuit officials in attendance for the fair, Maggie's eyes were burning, is a stage. He's building us a stage and he doesn't know it. He thinks he's going to humiliate us in front of the county. We are going to let him start, and then we are going to finish. There was a silence while they all understood it. You want us to walk into the open, Tom said slowly, where he's strongest, and expose him to his own audience. I want us to do it once, all at once, where he can't call our loans one by one before we're ready, where he can't make us disappear quiet. He's spent years counting on our shame to keep us silent. Maggie laid her hand flat on the stack of contracts. 6 days. We gather everything. We find the surveyor, and at that fair, when Silas Crow stands up to bury us, every family in this yard stands up with the proof in their hands. She looked around at them. Are you with me? It was Widow Calloway, the smallest and angriest of them, who answered first. I've got nothing left for him to take, she said. He already took it. I'm with you to the gallows, Mrs. Walker. And one by one, the rest of them said it too. Ethan rode north for Bitter Creek the next morning before the sun was up because the surveyor would talk to a rancher with dirt on his boots faster than to anyone else, and because Maggie needed to stay and build the case. He was gone 2 days. Maggie did not sleep much either night. He came back on the 4th evening alone, and her heart dropped at the sight of the empty saddle behind him until he swung down and said the words fast before she could break. He's coming, not with me. Too dangerous to ride together, he said, in case Crow's got men watching the roads. But he's coming. He'll be at the fair. Ethan gripped her shoulders. Maggie, it's worse than we thought. Way worse. Tell me. His name's Eli Mills, and he didn't just move boundary lines. Ethan's voice dropped. Crow had him survey land for foreclosure that wasn't even mortgaged. Land folks owned free and clear. Crow forged loan papers, backdated them, then sent Eli to mark the lines like the debt was real. The families never borrowed a dime. They just woke up one day owing money they never took on land they'd held for 20 years. He swallowed. Eli quit the day Crow asked him to do it to a family with 4 little ones. Said he couldn't put his name to throwing children off their own ground. Crow told him. Ethan's jaw worked. Crow told him if he ever spoke a word, they'd find him in a creek bed. That's why he ran. Maggie stood very still. He'll swear to it, she asked, in front of officials, with his name on it. He'll swear. He's tired of running. He said. Ethan's eyes shone. He said a fat woman in Clover Falls finally stood up to Crow, and he'd be damned if he'd let her do it alone. Word travels, Maggie. Folks are talking. About you. Maggie turned away so he wouldn't see her face. For a woman who'd spent 30 years as the thing people whispered about with contempt being whispered about with hope was almost more than she could bear. Then we have him, she said, steadying. We have the contracts, and we have the surveyor, and we have the families. 2 days, and... A horse came hard up the road. It was the Pratt boy riding bareback, and he was shouting before he reached the yard. Mrs. Walker. Mrs. Walker, you gotta come. It's Tom Avery. Maggie's blood went cold. What about him? Crow's men came to his place this afternoon. Said his loans called early. Said he's got till sundown tomorrow to pay in full, or they take everything. The boy's face was streaked with tears and dust. And that ain't all. They took his contracts, the ones he was holding for you, busted in his strong box and took 'em all. Ma says Crow knows. Ma says somebody talked. The yard went silent. Somebody had talked. Maggie felt it land like a stone in her chest. They'd been careful. They'd moved quiet. And somewhere in their careful, quiet circle, a frightened soul had gone to Crow. Who? Ethan said, low and dangerous. Who would... It doesn't matter who, Maggie cut in, though her hands had gone cold. It matters what he does next. If he knows we're gathering, he knows we mean to use the fair, which means he'll either call every loan at once to scatter us before then. She was already moving, already thinking, or he'll come for the evidence, the contracts, the surveyor. Her eyes flew wide. The surveyor. Ethan, if somebody told Crow everything they told him about Eli Mills. Ethan was already reaching for his saddle. He's riding in alone, on the North Road, tomorrow. And Crow knows the North Road. Maggie's voice cracked for the first time in the whole long week. We gave him a witness and a route and a day. We handed him the man's life. For one terrible moment, they just looked at each other, the rancher and his clever wife, and the whole bright plan turned to ash in front of them. Then Maggie did the thing she always did. She stopped feeling and she started thinking. No, she said. No. Listen to me. If he sends men to the North Road, he splits his force. He can't crush Tom and hunt the surveyor and prepare his show at the fair not all at once, not with the few men he keeps. She grabbed Ethan's arm. You ride for Eli tonight. Now. Find him before Crow's men do get him off the North Road. Bring him in by the creek trail nobody uses. Can you do that? I can do that. Then go. She turned to the Pratt boy. Tell your mother to ride to every family that's with us. Tell them Crow knows, and tell them it changes nothing, except that now we don't wait for the fair. Her chin came up, and the iron came back into her. We don't have 6 days anymore. We have 1, so we move tomorrow, at the fair, whether we're ready or not. And Tom, Ethan asked. He loses everything at sundown tomorrow. Then the fair happens before sundown. Maggie was already gathering the contracts, the ones they still had, pressing them to her chest. He took Tom's papers to silence him. He doesn't know I copied every figure into my own ledger the night Tom brought them. The originals are gone. The evidence isn't. She almost laughed wild and fierce. He keeps reaching for the paper, Ethan, and he keeps forgetting the woman who read it. Ethan swung up into the saddle. Looked down at her, at this woman the whole county had laughed at a week ago now, standing in a dark yard holding the only proof that could save a dozen families with the most powerful man in Wyoming hunting all of them at once. Maggie, he said, if this goes wrong tomorrow, it won't. But if it does... He held her eyes. I want you to know I'd have married you in that church for free. No loan, no letter, no nothing. Maggie's throat closed. Go find Eli Mills, she said, and come back to me. We have a man to ruin in the morning. He wheeled the horse and rode into the dark, and Maggie stood alone in the yard, with the contracts against her heart. And one day left, to do what no one in Clover Falls had ever dared. And somewhere across that black county, Silas Crow was already moving his pieces, certain, absolutely certain that he had won. Ethan came back at dawn with Eli Mills riding beside him, and dust on both their faces, and Maggie met them at the gate with the question she'd been holding all night. Did anyone follow you? Crow's men were on the North Road, just like you said. Ethan answered, swinging down. 3 of them. We came in by the creek. They never saw us. He nodded at the man beside him. Maggie, this is Eli Mills. The surveyor was thin and worn a man who'd been looking over his shoulder for a year, but when he took off his hat to her, his hands were steady. Mrs. Walker, he said. My sister wrote me you were the one finally standing up to him. Took me a year to find the nerve. You did it in a week. He swallowed. I've got the original survey maps. The real boundaries before Crow had me redraw 'em. And I'll swear in front of God, the county, and any judge you put in front of me, that he forged loans on land folks never mortgaged. His jaw set. I'm done running. Then we have everything, Maggie said. And for one moment, standing in that gray dawn with the surveyor's maps and the family's figures, and her husband home safe, she let herself believe it. That was when the Pratt boy rode in again, and this time his face told the story before his mouth did. They got Tom, he cried. Crow's men came back at first light, said since his loan's due today, anyhow they're taking the place now. They've got him locked in his own barn, and they're loading his stock. Sundown was the deadline, Ethan said. He's not allowed to. He's Crow, Maggie said grimly. The deadline was never the law. It was the leash. She was already moving. He's not just taking Tom's land, he's making an example. He wants every family who's with us to see what happens when you cross him the morning of the fair, so they're too scared to stand up by afternoon. She turned to the gathering men. He's trying to break our nerve before we ever reach the fairgrounds. Then it's working, Henderson muttered. Half the folks who said they'd come last night will see what he did to— No, they won't, Maggie said, because we're not going to let him have that morning. She looked at Ethan. We ride to Tom's. Now. All of us. Not to fight Crow's men, we don't win that fight, and we're not fools. We ride so that when his men look up from loading that stock, they see 20 families standing at the fence line watching them. Witnesses, names, faces. Let them try to steal a man's life in front of 20 people who will swear to it at the fair this afternoon. They rode, and it worked the way Maggie said it would, because cruelty done in the dark is one thing, and cruelty done in front of a wall of staring neighbors is another. Crow's 3 men stood in Tom Avery's yard with their hands full of another man's property, and they looked up and they saw the fence line filling with wagons and faces, and something in them faltered. This here's lawful business, the lead man called, but his voice wasn't sure. Then you won't mind us watchin'? Maggie called back calm and clear from the front of the line. Lawful business likes an audience. It's only the other kind that hides. She let that carry. We'll be at the fair this afternoon, gentlemen. All of us. You can tell Mr. Crow his neighbors send their regards. The men loaded the last of the stock in a sullen hurry and rode off, and Maggie had Tom out of his own barn within the minute, shaken and furious, and weeping with the particular shame of a proud man who'd been made helpless in front of his friends. I'm sorry, he kept saying. I'm sorry I held your papers, and I let him take 'em. I'm sorry, Tom. Maggie took his face in her hands like a mother. You didn't lose anything that matters. I copied every figure. The proof is safe. And in 3 hours you are going to stand up at that fair, and you are going to tell the whole county what he did to you this morning. She held his eyes. He gave you the best testimony in the territory, Tom. He did it to himself. Tom wiped his face. Who told him, Maggie? Somebody told him we were gathering. Somebody in our own circle. And there it was again, the cold question that had sat in Maggie's chest all night. After the fair, she said. We find out after. Right now it doesn't matter. Right now we have a man to ruin. She turned to the families crowded in the yard. Go home. Put on your good clothes. Bring your contracts, the ones we copied, and bring your children because I want Crow to look out at that crowd and see exactly who he's been stealing from. We go to the fair as families, and we leave it free. The fairgrounds by afternoon were the fullest. Clover Falls had been all year, and somewhere in the press of the county stood the territorial circuit officials who'd come for the festivities and had no idea they were about to become a court. Silas Crow took the speaker's platform at 3 o'clock, exactly as he'd announced, exactly as he'd planned in his fine coat with his silver-headed cane, and he raised his hands for quiet. And the quiet came because it always came when Crow wanted it. Friends, he said, warm as Sunday, I'm afraid I bring a sad piece of business to our happy day. As many of you know, I have long extended my hand to the struggling families of this county. Sometimes that hand is refused. Sometimes a debt cannot be paid. He let his eyes find Ethan and Maggie at the edge of the crowd, and his smile widened. It is my regret to announce that the Walker Ranch, having defaulted on its obligations, is as of today forfeit. The barren man and his clever wife, a few nervous laughs conditioned automatic, have run out of cleverness. Let it be a lesson. The accounts of Silas Crow come due. He spread his hands to the crowd, expecting the old laughter, the old fear. And Maggie Dawson stepped forward. She did not shout. She walked to the foot of the platform into the open space where everyone could see her, the fat woman the whole county had mocked at her own wedding. And she turned not to Crow but to the crowd, and she lifted her voice just enough. Before Mr. Crow takes my husband's land, she said, I'd like the county to hear how he came to own the debt. Crow's smile thinned. This is not the time. It's exactly the time. She held up the Walker contract. This is the loan my husband signed. 8% interest written in the body in plain ink. And this, she turned the page so the front rows could see, is the 14% Mr. Crow wrote in the margin afterward in his own hand, with no signature, no initial, no consent. He changed the number after my husband signed. That is not a debt, friends. That is a theft dressed up as a debt. A murmur ran through the crowd. Crow's two men shifted at the edge of the platform. "A clever forgery of her own," Crow said smoothly to the crowd. "She's had a week to scribble in the margins of anything. Where's her proof it's my hand?" "Right here." And Widow Calloway stepped out of the crowd, her contract in her trembling fist. "Same hand, same trick. He doubled my rate the year my Henry died." She held it up. "I'm 71 years old, and I never owed a soul a penny I didn't pay. He robbed me while I was burying my husband. And me." Henderson stepped forward. "Same margin, same handwriting. And me." The Pratts. One by one they came out of the crowd. The families Maggie had spent the week gathering, each with a paper held high, and the murmur in the fairgrounds rose into something with an edge to it, and Crow's smile was gone now entirely. "These people are debtors trying to escape their debts," Crow snapped to the officials near the platform. "It's the oldest story there is. They'll say anything." "They might," Maggie agreed. "A debtor's word against a banker's. You're right, Mr. Crow. That's exactly the corner you've always hidden in. Their word against yours, and who'd believe the broke man over the bank?" She paused and the whole fairground leaned in. "So I won't ask you to take their word, or mine. I'll ask you to take your own surveyors." For the first time in his life, Silas Crow's face went white. "Eli Mills," Maggie called, and Eli Mills walked out of the crowd. The effect on Crow was like a blow. He actually stepped back, his cane scraping the platform, his mouth working. "You're supposed to be," he started, and then caught himself, but the whole county had heard the shape of it. "Dead," Eli said quietly, climbing the platform steps so all could see him. "On the North Road, that's where your men were waiting for me this morning, Crow. They missed." He turned to the officials, to the crowd, and he held up a roll of maps. "My name is Eli Mills. For 3 years I surveyed the foreclosure boundaries for this man, and I'm here to tell you the lines are false." He unrolled a map. He had me redraw boundaries to swallow land that was never mortgaged. And worse, his voice broke and steadied. He forged loan papers on families that never borrowed a cent. Backdated them. Sent me to mark the lines like the debt was real. The Garrett family. The Olsons. Honest folks who woke up owing money they never took on land they'd held for 20 years. He looked at Crow. "I quit the day you asked me to do it, to a house with 4 little children in it. And you told me I'd end up in a creek bed if I ever spoke. Well," he spread his arms, "here I am, speakin'." The fairground erupted. Crow was shouting now, gripping the platform rail, his composure gone to pieces. "Lies. This man is a disgruntled employee, a thief I dismissed. He's invented every word." "Then you won't object to the territorial officials examining the original survey records against these," Maggie said, and held up Eli's maps beside a second set. "The real boundaries and the ones you had drawn, side by side. Any honest man can see where the lines were moved." She turned to the officials who had pushed to the front, now no longer spectators. "Gentlemen, you came for a fair. I'm afraid you've stumbled into something else. Will you look?" The lead official, a graying man with the territorial seal on his coat, took the maps from her hands. He looked at one, then the other. His face changed. "These boundaries don't match," he said slowly. "Not by a little. By acres." He looked up at Crow. "Mr. Crow, these foreclosure surveys appear to have been altered." "That man altered them. Mills, arrest him. He swore to it under his own name in front of 200 witnesses," the official said. "Why would a man confess to a crime to frame someone else?" And then Ethan Walker climbed the platform, and the crowd hushed for the broken man they'd laughed at a week ago. He didn't have papers. He had his bare hands, and he set them on the rail, and he looked out at the county that had pitied him his whole life. "You all knew something was wrong," Ethan said. "Every one of you. You watched families lose ground that was paid for. You watched widows go broke paying debts that only got bigger. And you said nothing because he held your paper too, and you were ashamed, and you figured better them than you." He let that sit. He counted on that shame, built his whole empire on it. He did all of this behind closed doors where no one could see. Ethan turned to Crow. So we're ending it in the open, in the sun, in front of everybody, where you've got nowhere left to hide." Crow's eyes were darting now from the official to the maps to the wall of faces that were no longer laughing, no longer afraid, but turning on him with the slow, terrible weight of a town that has finally stopped being ashamed. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed low to Maggie as the officials closed in. "You think these officials will cross me? I hold paper on." "On half of them, yes," Maggie said quietly, "but not all, and it only takes one honest official to open a territorial inquiry. You taught me that, Mr. Crow. It only takes one person willing to read the page." She held his eyes. "You shouldn't have let a fat woman read your books." "Mr. Crow." The territorial official's hand came down on his shoulder. "I think you'd best come with us. There are questions that need answering, and I'd advise you to answer them carefully." And Silas Crow, who an hour ago had stood on that platform to bury the walkers in front of the whole county, looked out at a crowd that had come for his show and stayed for his ruin. And for the first time in 30 years, no one in Clover Falls was laughing at anyone but him. They took Silas Crow away that same afternoon, and the territorial inquiry he'd sworn would never touch him opened within the week. It moved slower than the families wanted, and faster than Crow had ever believed possible. And at the heart of it, day after day, sat Margaret Walker with her copied ledgers and her stacks of contracts, explaining numbers to men who'd come into the room, certain a woman couldn't have built such a case, and left it certain no one else could have. "Walk me through it again, Mrs. Walker," the lead investigator said on the third day, a careful man named Hollis, who'd been sent down from the territorial capital. "The Garrett family. You say they never borrowed at all." "They never borrowed a cent," Maggie said. She laid the forged paper beside Eli Mills's original survey. "But Mr. Crow created this loan document backdated to 4 years ago and had the boundary redrawn to mark their homestead as collateral. The Garretts woke up one morning being told they owed money they'd never taken. When they couldn't pay a debt that didn't exist, he foreclosed." She set down a second sheet. "Here's the deed transfer. Their land into a holding company. And here's the holding company." She turned it over. "Owned by Silas Crow." Hollis studied it a long moment. "He built a paper trail to steal land, and the paper trail is what hangs him." "He was very careful," Maggie said. "He just never imagined anyone would be careful back." Hollis looked at her. This woman the local men had warned him was a troublemaker, a malcontent, a fat spinster with a grudge. "How many families, Mrs. Walker, all told?" 19 that I found, Maggie said. "There may be more. He'd been doing it for 11 years. 11 years. Hollis set down his pen. And nobody stopped him. Nobody read the page. It became the phrase that traveled the county that summer. Nobody read the page. The widows said it to each other. The ranchers said it over fences. They said it the way people say a thing that shames them and frees them in the same breath because every one of them had held a contract they didn't understand and trusted the man who wrote it, and every one of them had been robbed for it. The case against Crow collapsed his empire piece by piece. His lending operation was shut down by territorial order. His assets were frozen pending restitution. The forged loans were declared void, and the foreclosures built on them reversed one by one, until families who'd lost their ground 2 and 3 winters back were handed back the deeds to land they'd grieved for. Widow Calloway got her husband's homestead back on a Tuesday. She rode out to the Walker Ranch that same evening, climbed down off her wagon without help, and stood in the yard with the deed pressed to her chest and her dried apple face working. "I came to say a thing, and I'm going to say it before I lose the nerve," she announced. "I spent 2 years thinking I was a foolish old woman who couldn't do her sums. 2 years, Mrs. Walker, believing I'd lost Henry's land 'cause I was stupid." Her voice cracked. "You didn't just give me back my ground. You gave me back the truth that I wasn't a fool, that a thief stole from me and it wasn't my failin'." She thrust the deed forward like an offering. "I don't have words big enough, so I brought you Henry's deed to hold a minute, so you'd know what you handed back to me. It ain't the land, it's my own good name. Maggie held the deed and held the old woman's hands around it, and for once found she had no clever thing to say. "You were never a fool, Mrs. Calloway," was all she managed. Not for one day. The Garrett family came too with their 4 children, the same 4 children whose presence had finally broken Eli Mills's nerve a year before. The youngest, a girl of 6, had been told only that the kind lady had saved their house, and she walked up to Maggie at the fence and tugged her skirt and asked with the directness of children, "Are you the lady that's smarter than the bad man?" "I read better than him," Maggie said. "That's all. Ma says you're the smartest person in the whole county." "Your ma is generous." "Ma says you're a hero." And Maggie, who had been called every cruel thing a person could be called in 30 years of living, who had taught herself not to cry the way other people taught themselves to ride, crouched down to the child's level and had to look away for a moment before she could answer. "You tell your ma," she said, "that a hero is just somebody who didn't look away when it was easier to. That's all I did. Anybody can do it. Most folks just don't." As for the one who'd betrayed them, the one who'd run to crow in the dark, Maggie learned the answer the way she'd learned everything else, by paying attention. It was Henderson. He came to her himself before she ever accused him gray-faced and unable to meet her eyes, and confessed it standing in her yard with his hat crushed in his hands. "Crow held my note," he said. "Came to me that week private. Said if I told him what you were planning, he'd forgive my debt. Said if I didn't, he'd take my place and my brothers both." His voice was thick with shame. "I've got 6 mouths to feed, Mrs. Walker. I told him about the gathering. I told him about the surveyor. I didn't know they'd go for the man on the road, I swear before God. I didn't know that part." He broke off. "Tom near lost his place 'cause of me. Eli near lost his life. I'll understand if you can't look at me. I can't hardly look at myself. The other families would have run him out of the county. Tom Avery, when he heard, wanted to." But Maggie looked at Henderson, at the fear that had driven him, the same fear Crow had used on all of them, and she understood it better than anyone alive. "You were a frightened man with 6 children, and the most powerful man in the territory told you to choose between your neighbors and your babies," she said quietly. "That's not a flaw in you, Mr. Henderson. That's the exact weapon he built his whole empire out of. He made good people betray each other, and then made them too ashamed to ever band together." She held his eyes. "I'm not going to do his work for him by tearing us apart now that he's gone. You made it right by coming here and saying it to my face. That's more than Crow ever did in 11 years. She put out her hand. "We're not finished being neighbors, not over this." Henderson stared at her hand like he couldn't believe it. Then he took it, and the proud man wept openly in her yard, and that was the last time anyone in Clover Falls spoke of betrayal. The Walker Ranch was restored in full. The forged amendment was struck, the hidden payment credited, the false rate reversed, and when the figures were finally honest, Ethan Walker owned his father's land free and clear. For the first time in a decade, the debt that had nearly cost him everything wiped clean by the truth his wife had read off the page. He came to find her on the evening it was made final, the deed in his hand, and he didn't speak of the land at all. "You remember what I asked you," he said, "outside Crow's office. You said ask again when his empire's ashes." Maggie turned from the fence. "I remember." "Well?" Ethan turned his hat in his hands, the broken Walker boy gone now, a steady man standing in his place. "It's ashes. Whole thing. So I'm askin'." He took a breath. "We did this marriage backward. Started it as a trap somebody set for the both of us. But somewhere in it, Maggie, I stopped being a man paying a debt and started being a man who can't picture a single day worth living without you in it." His voice roughened. "The whole town thought they were selling me the worst bargain a man ever got. They were too stupid to know they handed me the best thing that ever walked into my life. So I'm asking proper this time. No contract, no Crow, no nothing. Margaret Dawson, will you marry me? For real?" For a long moment, Maggie didn't answer. She'd spent her whole life being told what she was worth by people who'd never bothered to find out. Too big, too plain, too much, not enough. A charity bride, a punchline at her own wedding. And here stood a good man looking at her like she was the finest thing in the territory and meaning every word of it. "Ask me in the church," she said. "The same church. where they all came to laugh. Ethan blinked. "You want to go back there?" "I want to stand in that exact spot," Maggie said, and her chin came up. "Where 200 people came to watch me be humiliated, and I want them to come back and watch me be chosen, on purpose, by a man who means it." Her eyes burned. "I didn't break in that room, Ethan. Now I want to be happy in it. Let them watch that too." They were married in the Clover Falls church 3 weeks later, and the same pews that had held 200 people come to laugh, held 200 people come to celebrate, and the difference between those two crowds was the whole distance Maggie Walker had traveled in a single summer. Pastor Hewitt, who'd once leaned in to spare her the shame of being left at the altar, performed the ceremony with his voice cracking. Tom Avery stood up as a witness. Widow Calloway sat in the front pew and wept through every word. Eli Mills came down from the north with his sister Cora free now to walk the streets of the town he'd fled. The Garrett children threw flowers. Real ones this time, not the ones the Hartley sisters had mocked in her hair, and when Pastor Hewitt asked who gave this woman to be married, the whole county answered at once because by then she belonged to all of them. And when it was done, when Ethan kissed his wife in the church where she'd once stood alone, the town that had laughed at Margaret Dawson rose to its feet and cheered for Margaret Walker until the windows shook. She did not become beautiful in their eyes because she'd changed. She had not changed at all. She was the same woman who'd walked into that church a season before. The same size, the same sharp tongue, the same steady chin. What had changed was that the town had finally been forced to see her clearly, and seen clearly. She was the most formidable person any of them had ever known. The thing they'd mocked her for, that she noticed everything that she never stopped thinking that she was too much, had turned out to be the very thing that saved 19 families and broke a tyrant's grip on the whole county. They had laughed at her for being too much. They lived now in a county she'd remade precisely because she was. At the gathering after, when the dancing had wound down and the lamps burned low, the little Garrett girl found her again, the one who'd asked if she was the lady smarter than the bad man. "Were you scared?" the child asked. "Of the bad man." "When you read his books." Maggie thought about it. Thought about the church full of laughter, the cold of Crow's office, the 7 days the man on the North Road, the whole long summer of being the one person willing to stand in the open. "Every minute," she said. "But scared isn't the same as stopping. You can be scared the whole way through and still not stop. That's the only secret I've got, child. Don't let anybody convince you that being afraid means you have to quit." Ethan came to her side then and put his arm around her, the protective gesture that had once silenced a church, and they stood together watching the county that had once laughed at them dance in the lamplight as friends. "You know what they're saying now?" Ethan murmured. "In town, about you. I can imagine. They're saying Clover Falls got lucky the day Crow tried to humiliate the wrong woman." He smiled down at her. "They're saying he could have picked anybody in the county to make a joke of, and he picked the one person sharp enough to read his ruin right off his own pages." Maggie looked out at the land that had been saved, at the families who'd been made whole, at the man beside her, who'd chosen her in front of everyone, and she thought of the girl. She'd been the one told 1,000 times, in 1,000 ways, that she was too much and not enough, and a burden the world would rather not carry. That girl had believed them once. She did not believe them anymore. "They spent 30 years telling me I was too much," Maggie said quietly, watching the lamplight. "Too big, too loud, too sharp, too much woman for anybody to want." She turned to her husband, and there was no tremble in her. Now no chin held against the cruelty. Only the calm certainty of a woman who had finally measured her own worth and found the town's arithmetic wrong. They were right about one thing. I was always too much. I was just too much for the wrong people. And Margaret Walker, who was mocked for her size and chosen for her strength, who read a tyrant's empire right off the page and handed a whole county back its truth, never once needed anyone to tell her what she was worth again, because she had finally proven to herself and to every soul who'd ever laughed that she had never been too much and never been too little. She had always, every single day of her life, been exactly enough.